Okay, the Russo-Japanese War in 1905 started with a Japanese surprise attack on Russia troops based in China. Japan forced Russia to abandon its expansionist policy in China. Japan ended the war with the Treaty of Portsmouth, which was delegated by President Theodore Roosevelt. It ended with the Japan control of the Liaoning Peninsula, and it ended Russia's influence in the southern Manchu. It also recognized Japan's control of Korea and ended it was caused by political unrest in Russia. World War I started in 1914 with the death of Archduke Francis Ferdinand. He was a leader of Austria-Hungary, and he was assassinated by Serbia nationalists looking to eliminate Austria-Hungary presence in Serbia. This was a key example of nationalism that triggered World War I. After this, Austria-Hungary looked to Germany, its ally, while Serbia, full of ethnic slaves, looked to its ally Russia for support. Austria-Hungary eventually issued an ultimatum to Serbia to end their terrorist group, the Black Hand, in Austria-Hungary, or they would start a war. However, Serbia rejected this ultimatum, resulting in the First World War. In World War I warfare, there's many new technologies that were developed for use in the warfare, such as poisonous gas, trench warfare, machine guns, and submarines. Trench warfare was extremely part in World War I. It caused many new casualties and tried the lives of many new soldiers. Also, technology such as nuclear warfare eventually developed toward the end of the war in part of the Manhattan Project, which was an organization in New York based on developing nuclear weaponry. World War I consisted of two groups, the Allied and the Central Powers. The Allied consisted of Great Britain, France, Russia, and Serbia. Italy later switched from the Central Powers back to the Allied in the middle of the war. U.S. also joined the middle of the war in 1917. The Central Powers consisted of Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria. There were three reasons that the U.S. eventually entered the war in 1917. One was that they considered the Allied powers more democratic than the Central Powers. Another reason was that the Allied powers had economic ties to the U.S. The third was growing resentment, such as the Zimmermann trial, which Germany sent to Mexico, promising land in the U.S. if Mexico helped them win the war. World War I was a total war, meaning that a nation often devoted all of its resources to fighting in the war, such as mobilizing its whole industry to developing weaponry. Some aspects of it include propaganda, which often used crudely and misfigured descriptions of the enemy to alter public opinion in favor against the enemy and into fighting the war. Here's an example of World War I and World War II propaganda, which motivated men to fight in the army against other nations, which they believed to be extremely bad or evil, and against U.S. beliefs.
Have you ever wanted to be a real man and impress the ladies?
Then you should join the war.
Okay, so in the middle of the war, the Russian Revolution toppled Russia and established a new form of provisional government in the form of the monarchy that it replaced. Lenin established a treaty and negotiated peace treaties with Germany, removing Russia from the war. This was called the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. It gave Germany a huge amount of land in exchange for Russia being exempt and moved out of the war, giving Russia a time to recover from the Russian revolutions. The Paris Peace Conference efficiently ended World War I. It was attended by the Great Four, otherwise known as the United States, Great Britain, France, and Italy. They established a Treaty of Versailles, which forced Germany to pay hundreds of millions of dollars in reparations to the countries involved in the war. Wilson failed to convince the other nations not to punish Germany, so the Treaty of Versailles was amended and Germany fell into great economic decline because of the reparations they were forced to pay. The Soviet Union was not invited to the Paris Peace Conference as it had overgone a communist revolution and the leaders feared communist influencing their own home countries. Also, the Italians walked out because they were not promised the land that they would get in exchange for switching sides to the Allied forces. Let's move on to the Great Depression. After World War I, its primary causes were agricultural overproduction and the stock market crash. Also, the economic impact of World War I took its toll on the nations of Europe by plunging their governments into economic decline. During the Great Depression, unemployment rates rose and banks failed. Some primary causes were the Allied nations lost millions of citizens during World War I. They also spent tremendous amounts of money fighting World War I. The nation that suffered the most during the Great Depression was Germany, as the economic reparations it had to pay caused great damage to its economy and created inflation within its economy. Presidents such as FDR instituted ideas like Keynesian ideas of deficit spending, which meant that governments should spend money to help create jobs. However, he removed these policies as they were plunging U.S. back into the Great Depression. The U.S. would gradually come out of the Great Depression at the start of World War II. During the Great Depression, economies lost faith in their governments and started moving toward fascism. Fascist supporters such as Benito Mussolini took control in Italy after discontent from World War I, since Italy was exempt from all the territories that they were promised during World War I. Like World War I, World War II was a total war, meaning that entire nations' economies and nations devoted all their resources into the war effort. Also, since the U.S. was not in an active war zone, they could ramp up production without fear of attack, producing ammunition, grenades, and airplanes. Also, when men were drafted into war and fought overseas during World War II, women found new opportunities that they hadn't seen before, as such as opportunities to work in factories. World War II was a significant war in history, resulting in the most wartime deaths ever. The Nuremberg Laws were a series of laws that expelled Jews from Jewish society. It effectively removed Jewish citizenship in Germany and punished them to the very extent of German society. Okay. The Russian revolutions in 1917 caused Lenin to take over power. He realized Russia's economy after the 5-year plans were near a collapse and instituted a new economic plans, which were a step away from the communist policies toward capitalist policies. Stalin instituted the 5-year plans, which were meant to turn Russia into an industrial power. He collectivized agriculture and took lands away from peasants and gave them to collectivizers. However, this effectively reduced agricultural production as peasants revolted, burning their crops. It also caused mass starvation and a great economic decline. Okay, after World War II, the US and the Soviet Union emerged as the world superpowers. The creation of the League of Nations did not work and was not successful in preventing war, so the world superpowers came together and created the United Nations. The United Nations had more rights and greater political control than a previous League of Nations. Also, during the Cold War, which began with the Truman Doctrine, countries saw the development of the Iron Curtain across separating Eastern Europe from Western Europe, where Eastern Europe were controlled by the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union developed these satellite states to mainly benefit the Soviet Union. President Truman said that the U.S. would do what it had to do to stop the flow of communism. Propaganda issued by the U.S., such as a duck and cover video, included having a participant hide under a desk to make them feel safer about themselves. These duck and cover videos were often over-exaggerated the safety benefits of hiding under a desk, as in the event of a real atomic warfare, hiding under a desk would not make you safe.
There was a turtle by the name of Bert, and Bert the turtle was very alert. When danger threatened him, he never got hurt. He knew just what to do. He ducked and covered, ducked and covered. He did what we all must.
The Berlin blockade was a blockade around Germany after the Soviet Union felt like their presence in Germany was being threatened. Therefore, the Berlin airlift happened to bring supplies into Berlin. And that took place around the course of 9 to 10 months until the Soviet Union lowered the Berlin blockade and agreed that it was a failure. Also, the Cold War saw development of an arms race between the Soviet Union and the U.S., including development of hydrogen bombs by both nations and development of new technology such as Sputnik, the first satellite in space launched by Russia. Its Cold War period saw the development of new alliances such as NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, developed against communism. In direct opposition, Soviets developed the Warsaw Pact, which was a pact between communist states. In Cuba, during this time period, Fidel Castro overthrows the previous Cuban dictator, so therefore goes and tries to form greater bonds with the Soviet Union, leading to the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis was where the Soviet Union then sent nuclear warheads to Cuba, creating a crisis as those nuclear warheads were extremely close to the Florida coast. This caused This was the closest that the US and the Soviet Union ever came to instituting World War III. However, those warheads were removed from Cuba in exchange for the US removing warheads from Turkey. Here's an example of the Cold War arms race, which developed between the Soviet Union and the United States, including in the both nations developing weapons of increasingly mass destruction, which would, in turn, lead up to the nuclear bombs, which could devastate the entire world.
You erase your side down people disgust me.
You erase your side up people disgust me. Look at that yellow on the bottom.
Oh yeah? Do you want to go?
Yes.
Yeah?
Look at my soap, Ultra Deluxe. Yep, go back home.